Greetings, programmers. Today we're going to talk about how to use cookies. And ultimately what I'd like to do is this is going to be a brief series on how to make a web store so that ostensibly you could sell products on it. But just a little caveat before we get started on that, I would not use this code to build an actual professional web store. There's certain elements of security that we're not going to talk about in this video series. This is purely for academic purposes to understand the concepts of how to write the JavaScript to do that and what cookies look like. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. The first thing I do need to mention is I am loading these web pages directly from their files. I do not have a server running on my computer right now. And one of the drawbacks to that is that Google Chrome will not open HTML files with cookies in them unless you are running them through a server. It's a security thing with Google Chrome. So I'm using Microsoft Edge for this. I personally recommend Firefox to test their cookies if you're doing it straight from a file. In fact, when we get further into it, we're going to have to use Firefox. And I'll explain that as we get to that. But for right now, we're using Microsoft Edge. And so first thing is, what is a cookie? Well, a cookie is information that is being stored on your web page so that you can use it between different pages in your web page, or even we could use it if you want to store information and then close the website and come back to it later. Maybe say you want to store the data for a day or a week or so, and you can still have that data stored. Most commonly, websites would use this to store passwords and login credentials. But for today, we're just going to look at how we could store some basic information. So what I've done is I've created this file. We'll look at it here in a moment. And what the file does is that it is going to create the statistics for a generic role-playing game character. And so here I have this button store, which is going to create the statistics, and then display shows those statistics. And so what you see here is the information that I stored. And I wanted you to see the format the information is stored in before we look at the code. So we have str equals 16, and then you'll notice that there's a semicolon. And then each of the different variables has the equal sign and the value, and then a semicolon at the end of it, except at the very last element. The very last element does not have a semicolon. Likewise, we could look at this information. So I have the inspector open up here. And in Microsoft Edge, if we select console, this will look at the console version of this, and we can pull up the cookie. It's stored in the DOM object as document.cookie. And there you see our cookie and the information that is stored in there. Okay, so now that we've seen the cookie on the actual page itself, let's look at how you actually create the cookie. All right, so first of all, let's look at my HTML document. And I've fully fleshed out this HTML document. When I'm playing with these things, I don't actually like to do that. But in this case, I did, because if you're going to follow along, one of the things that you might want to use as a tool to help you is to use an HTML validator to determine if your code is functioning, because it can be difficult to debug JavaScript. So it's useful to have your HTML be fully formed so that when you go to validate it, it will make it easier to find your errors. So I'm loading the JavaScript directly from a source file. It's easier to work, in my mind, on JavaScript files that are separated from the HTML. I've created an output portion of this called output to display the information. And then I have two buttons here, one with an on-click of store that will store the values, and one with display that displays the values. So when we go look at this, here's the store function and the display function. Let's go over the store function real quick. The store function has a loop, and then inside this loop I have, that's actually bad programming. I should actually put those lists outside the loop. These are static lists. And inside the loop, it was creating them over and over again. And that's not a really good idea. So here, I create these two lists. And there's one is just the attributes, and then the second one is the actual values. I want to store the attribute. And then in my loop, I've created the loop such that I'm counting from 0 to 6. And if you aren't familiar with JavaScript programming, lists in JavaScript are indexed starting from the number 0. So for example, if we go strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, charisma, that would be element, strength would be element 0, intelligence would be element 1, all the way up to charisma, which would be element 5. And if you need a little help with the mnemonics on that, if you just remember the first element is 0, last element will be whatever is the number of elements minus 1. And again, we have another list here called stats that has a corollary value that goes with each attribute. And then in our loop, we're counting one by one, and then I access the DOM object, the document.cookie, and I'm setting equal to whatever the name of the attribute is, and then we're appending an equal sign, and then we append the value from the second list, and then we set the semicolon, and then we determine a path for this. And this will create the cookie. If you wanted the cookie to persist, right now, if I were to close this website and reopen it, that cookie would be cleared because I'm not telling it when to expire. And we'll look at expiration a little bit later on these cookies, but just be aware we can make the cookie last longer, but right now we're not creating what I would call a durable cookie. And then on the display function, you see we're getting the element output from our HTML document, and then we're setting the inner HTML to our actual cookie so that we can look and see the format of it. So this is basically how you create and store and then read back cookies. In the next video, I want to look at how you would actually pull out the individual elements of that cookie.